My name is Victor Morales. I work for the Long Beach Fire Department. I am a hazmat specialist, business emergency plan inspector, CUPA inspector, and fire code inspector. We're going to continue with, the APSA and fire code requirements. Prior to starting my presentation, I would like to ask how many people here do actually perform APSA inspections? Oh, wow, quite a bit. And out of those that perform APSA inspections, how many of them do you normally work with fire code or issue fire code violations? Very few. Well, there are overlaps on APSA and fire code, but prior to keep on going, I would like to explain a little bit how the process works. When you have a facility and they are going to install a tank, you have to understand that they need to go through a process, and that process requires fire code plan check. It will require a permit, just like Robert explained before. It will require those checks and permits to be permitted, and then there will be an installation, there will be operation, there will be maintenance, there will be testing. That is what the fire code does. And this is the big document, Fire Code 2010, that we follow. And there are specific chapters that will apply to those above ground petroleum storage tanks. There are several chapters. The way the fire code is written is they will reference out different sections of the fire code. So, chapter 34, which is flammable combustible liquid storage, will say, well, the design installation has to comply with other chapter requirement or other standards as they see fit. Okay? Just to give you an idea that, we jump around between this, section 3404.2.7.5, and you're like, whoa, what is that? Well, it's the specific sections that the fire code provides for you to do everything. Installation, operation, testing, design, etc., etc. We're going to go through that. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask me questions after the presentation, because we have a number of slides that we need to go through. Opening other than vents. As you can see, any above ground petroleum storage tank will have a number of elements, ancillary equipment, that it is not only the venting of it, though. It will be filling lines, it will be piping, return piping that goes in and out, etc., etc. Well, all those elements are addressed in the fire code, and it will be defined in several sections. These are the sections that we have. Where's my pointer? Do I have it here? Okay, thank you. These are the sections that we name throughout the presentation. And that's where you're going to see information regarding, the specifics of the tank that you try to address. So, other than vents, you have filling, emptying, vapor recovery, connections for the type of material that you have, and these are the requirements that you have. Located outside, they have to be 5 feet or more from building openings or property lines that can be built upon, like Robert said. No more than 5 feet above grade, enclosed to the track, identified, and with liquid type cap. And if you have other types of materials, Class B, Class 3B flammable liquids, it will have to be addressed in a different way. That chapter does that. This will be it. Okay? The fill connection is a drop tube that, for reasons there is a gap to the bottom. The reason behind it is because you don't want a static electricity to build up when you're filling that thing, and consequently have a problem. They will have to Protected tanks, they will have to have a spill container no less than 5 gallons with the drain valve. And the equipment, they require equipment, machinery, alarm. All that has to be listed or approved. And again, we reference out a different chapter. So chapter 34 will not tell you it has to be a certain way. It will be chapter 27. Okay? Okay, this is one of those cement-coated tanks that survived on an explosion. And it did fairly well.
What caused the explosion?
I beg your pardon?
What caused the explosion?
Well, let's check it out. How do we go here? No connection.
So this is an advertisement by Combo showing that the thing survived. Maybe
Correct.
that's from failure.
At some point, yeah. Other openings can be fuel ports, connections, and you can see product fill line with the spill bucket, so make sure that nothing goes outside. And these are caps that are spring valved. On protected tanks, the fill pipe has to have a direct connection or cam lock. Those are the ears that you see in the connection. Okay. If the fill pipe extends below the top of the tank, the check valve has to be within 12 inches of the fill hose connection. And the openings can be only through the top. Now again, we go back to chapter 27. It's required for hazmat tanks over 500 gallons. It might not be necessarily an APSA tank. One of the things that I recommend you to know is the applicability of the APSA versus fire code, because chapter 34 deals with combustible and flammable liquid storage, but also has a section for underground storage tank, which is not necessarily something that you may do. It's required for this section, requires it for all protected tanks, class 1, 2, and 3 are liquid on UL 142 tanks. With the up section of tanks, above ground tanks, with less than 1,320 gallons. Chapter 27 has more specific requirements on that. If they are connected to fuel burning equipment, these sections will apply to it. And again, here's the book. So you need to know where to go if you need to address any of those. Overfill protection. Overfill is required per section 3404.2.9.7.6. Okay, it has to have prevention, automatic prevention for overfill. 90% of filling will give you a notification. 95% shut off or slow the flow rate. Now that will be automatic. It can be an alarm, or it will have some kind of pressure build-up mechanism, so it slows down. The driver has to determine the amount needed prior to start filling, and he will do that either with a gauge, one of those gauge sticks that they use for it, or they have an automatic system to determine the amount of fuel needed. Drain and diking, it's required for all tank except listed secondary contained tanks, because you have it built in. Now there is a little bit of a difference. The drainage will move any spilled liquid to an area away from where the tanks are, and the diking are berms or walls around the tanks to keep spill liquid in the area of the tanks. And again, it has a different standard when it references out to how the diking needs to be for that particular site. Secondary containment, it's required per section 2704 of the fire code on all protected tanks for section, by section 3404.2.7.4 of the California Fire Code. And if it is indoors when the maximal allowable quantity is exceeded. And chapter 27 and chapter 34, they have tables where you can see what those quantities are. It has to be monitored, and it has to be specified for cases where the drainage is used. If it is inside, we account for the single largest container and the fire sprinkler water. This is the section reference. If it is outside, is the single largest container and 24-hour, 25-year storm water. In here, you can see that there might be a difference with APSA requirements. Maybe APSA says that outside it has to be the 100-year storm event, or things of that nature. We do not account for rainwater or fire sprinkler water when you have drainage or diking. However, for volumetric calculations on secondary containment, you do have to account for rainwater or fire sprinkler to determine the amount needed. H occupancy, high hazard occupancies, they do require spill control. It is required by the fire code. It will tell you how much spill control you need and what are the design criteria, etc., etc. It has to prevent spills for entering other rooms or areas. You may have a facility where not the entire facility is an H occupancy. Only a portion of that facility may be an H occupancy. So you may have a fully operating facility that only a section of it where they store the hazmat or where they store their fuels, only that section is an H occupancy. And of course, it has to be permitted. It has to be plan checked by fire marshal. Some of the design criteria is found on this section of the fire code. The piping. The containment is not required unless you are inside a building and you exceed the maximum allowable quantity. Containment, you can see that, I think we had a picture of this diesel tank, and this is the containment area. Piping systems. Okay, when it comes to piping systems, we follow the American Society of Mechanical Engineers standards. Again, it's not fire code, it's not NFPA, it's not health and safety code, it's not APSA. We follow this, and these are the ones that are required. Metal, if the piping is made of special materials with a low melting point, then this section of the fire code, low melting point will be copper piping, aluminum piping, brass piping, even cast iron. If they have a low melting point, then they will have to be approved by ASME standards, NFPA. One of the things is I believe if it is underground, then it's okay. If it is above ground, then there is a table on this section, this chapter. Actually, this is a table where you can see if the piping system meets that standard or not. They have to be protected from fire. If they're going to be, leakage, you cannot expose people or structure, and the leakage can be readily controlled by a remote valve. Again, we go back to the piping systems. We're talking about the scheduling of the pipes. Now, if you are connecting those pipes, again, the fire code says it cannot be done in any way. It has to be according to certain sections. So if you're going to do joining of those piping systems through welding, flange, threaded, they have to meet certain criteria. The flexible joints has to be listed. It cannot be just any piece of equipment. And if you have liquids with NFPA rank of 3 or 4, then they have to have certain PSI pressured standards and leak detection and shut off. The support has to be also in compliance with this standard right here. They have to be supported, protected, and protected against fire exposure. And these are the supports. It has to have a number of manual control valves and check valves to operate the system properly and protect the plant under both normal conditions and emergency situations. The shut-off are required at point of use and source, must be visible, labeled, as required by Chapter 27, backflow, as required by Chapter 27, connection below liquid level. It requires an isolation valve, and it's Chapter 34. So you are going to be back and forth. If you ever going to have to apply these standards when you do your APSA or if you do a fire code inspection, you are going to be back and forth, checking. All this probably will be done during plant check. Hopefully will be done during plant check. But it's not unusual that certain facilities, even some reputable facilities, they install a tank without notifying the proper authority. And then is your jurisdiction the one that has to step in and make sure that all this is verified. We had a case in Long Beach where they did install a whole room with tanks, piping, et cetera, and they didn't consult with us prior to doing so. Okay? Manual gouging has to have, inside a building, has to have a check valve. What happened? Okay. Another part of that ancillary equipment, anti-siphon valves, that these will protect tanks from getting product back. They have on protected above ground tanks, they have to be approved in each external pipe that extends below the top of the tank. And the piping has to have a number of manual control valves or check valves to operate the system and protect if during both normal and emergency situations. Let's take a look at it. So this is it. Okay, so here we go. It prevents the flow back to the system. Is it me? Okay, too fast. Well, let me see if I can. And these are approved types of valves. Of course, tanks need to be labeled. You don't want to have any above ground petroleum tank with the proper labels on it. Fire code will require it. Health and safety code requires it. Different chapters in the fire code. NFPA requires it. You most likely are familiar with the standard NFPA 704 diamond with the numbers that will tell you how flammable, toxic, or reactive that material is. In addition to that, the signs that are associated to those hazmat, they have to say no smoking, danger, et cetera, et cetera. Again, we go back to the piping. It has to be according to the fire code and approved by the ASME standards. They have to display the name of the product, the direction of the flow, and every 20 feet. Also, if it goes through walls or if it changes directions, then you need to put signs on those. Protected tanks. This is the standard that applies to it, and you have to have information science documented how you are going to fill out that tank and the calibration of that tank. Okay, let's move it along. Okay, product name, NFPA standard 704. In here you will have, instructions, fill connections, other than vents, etc., etc. This is a typical above ground tank. labeling for the piping, direction of flow, name of product, NFPA. They have to be secured. Chapter 27 requires that if you have above hazardous materials and above ground tanks, you have to have security around it, to prevent unauthorized entry and safeguard. And it has to be away from sources of ignition, and these are the standards that require it. Impact protection. Chapter 27 says all hazmat. So it doesn't matter if it is petroleum product or not. If it is hazmat, Chapter 27 says you have to have impact protection. Flammable and combustible liquid piping has to have protection as well, and protected tanks by this standard. Now, how high, how big, etc., you have to refer to Section 312 of the California Fire Code here. That will tell you the specifics of it. We have a slide on it. Okay, the post has to be steel, concrete fill, 3 feet in the ground, 3 feet above minimum. In Long Beach, we have a local ordinance that says our posts have to be 4 feet tall at a minimum. They have to be 3 feet or more from the tank, and it's not here, but they have to be spaced at no more than 4 feet. So 4 feet or less. That is a standard 312. You don't have to have posts. It's not mandatory, but you can have other barriers. But they have to meet this requirement. They have to be a minimum of 3 feet, and they have to resist a force of 12,000 pounds applied 36 inches. Can you beef it up? By all means. If you have, like we do in Long Beach, in the marine terminals, we have top loaders that are, tons and tons of weight and pretty big size. Yeah, those can be beefed up to withstand a much larger impact. Tanks that are protected can use built-in protection, and that will be the Convault, concrete filled coated tank. Now I dare you to go through this with a forklift. See if you can make it. All right, but you can see that again. We're not talking probably. I don't know. I don't have a reference, but it looks like it is more than 4 feet, 3 feet. So 3 feet will be the minimum, and then your city or county jurisdiction can beef it up to whatever they want, local ordinance. Electrical. Well, this one here is actually a table, and it says, let me see, I got my notes, that you have to have the locations and the electrical requirements for any ancillary equipment associated to the tanks have to comply with these 2 sections. All right. Actually, also it has to comply with section. I believe this section here says it has to comply with section 605 of the California Electrical Code. They have to have static accumulation, and you have to do bonding and grounding per this code section here. Fire protection systems, as defined here, section 3403.2, fire extinguishers or automatic systems, fire sprinklers. The fire extinguishers follow, let me go back. They have to meet section 906 of the California Fire Code. And it's going to tell you, okay, do you have a motor vehicle fueling? It has to be within 75 feet this type, or within 30 feet this type. Okay. Automatic protection systems, they are required. by fire code, by Chapter 34, or your local jurisdiction. The determination, how much water, it depends on the occupancy. Obviously, a high hazard site is going to require a lot more fire water than business occupancy. And again, that goes through plant checking. Again, the plant checker will look at what kind of system they're going to put together, how much water they need. They will do the calculations. Hopefully they will do that. Your fire marshal will do that. When you bring a new tank inside a facility, you might require to alter your fire sprinkler system. You are bringing more hazmat to the site or more petroleum product to the site, and consequently the system that you previously had may not meet the standard that you need now, that you have 3,000 or 4,000 or 1,000 gallons of additional fuel material at the site. If you modify it, you have to re-permit it, you have to re-engineer it, and you have to, or maybe not, maybe your fire sprinkler system meets all the requirements. You never know, but it wouldn't hurt for you to verify if you need to alter that. Actually, not you, but the facility. So you may, as you do your APSA inspection and you're doing your, you have an SPCC, you got your PE certification, and et cetera, you go, whoa, so this tank is brand new. Did you guys check with fire code guys to make sure that your sprinkler system is capable of putting out a fire here or not? Food for thought. The change can be small or can be large. Addition, maybe not uncommon. Oh, sorry, I did the same thing. Chapter 34 has also a section that deals with special operations. And then NFPA deals with fire pumps. Other chapters within the California Fire Code deals with specific activities within the state of California, aviation facilities or dry cleaning, semiconductor. So if you need additional information on how any of these operations need to comply with fire code, you can address it at these chapters. Now, are these facilities APSA? I don't know. That is you need to know your regulation. You need to know if this is going to be an APSA facility or not. But, you know, there are fire code requirements for it, and there will be on these chapters. Some of the special operations that we have in the Chapter 34, farms, construction sites, well drilling and operations, bulk plant and terminals, transferred tank vehicles, refineries. I think we have everything in Long Beach. Well, everything but farms. I don't think we have any farms. So for farms, and we're going to go really quick through this farm thing, especially because, you know, I'm not a subject matter expert on this, but, you know, these are some of the requirements. They have to have labels, you know, with the product, flammable, keep away, 50 feet from buildings, combustible storage labels. If you have portable tanks, they have to be DOT designed and approved. The faucets have to be self-closing. Permanent tanks, 1,000 gallons or less. And temporary tanks, 10,000 gallons. And you go, whoa, temporary tanks, 10,000 gallons. How come that much more? Well, the reason behind it is because when you have farming is a seasonal activity. Wintertime, you get nothing. Summertime, you need to plow, you know, entire fields. So they bring machinery, equipment, et cetera, that needs fuel power. Single compartment, locked fill openings, vents, as required per Chapter 34. Planning restrictions, you cannot do it, you know, right next to certain areas or certain buildings or certain occupancies. Top opening, and approved pumping device. Gravity discharge, have to be stable, valve shelf, fusible link, et cetera, Indoors, I don't know about this. I cannot picture maybe like silos or something like that where they stored, large quantities. They have to have spill control. They have to have fire extinguishers, and they have to follow specs for the vehicle filling tanks. Fire pumps, NFPA installation. I'm not going to go through that too much. Wait a second. Maintenance, operation. Chapter 27 and Chapter 34 also, they will tell you how you need to operate these, sites where above ground tanks are. They will tell you how to operate, conditions, maintenance, installation, design, etc., etc. I wanted to go back to the special activities though, because some sites, at least we have a few of these in Long Beach, so we require them to follow fire code, and we look for, as an APSA inspector, you can look for how many feet away you are from a school site, because these operations cannot happen at any time and anywhere. They have to be within certain feet of institutional or educational or certain facilities with occupancies will require this to have. Also, they have to be 100 feet away from buildings, etc., etc. If you have any of this, please go through that chapter and make sure that your site complies with these requirements. And now let's go to the operations. So operations you can just not operate any way you want. You can just not bring a tank full of fuel and start pumping any way you want. You have to have it. You have to do it in a certain manner approved by fire code. If you have defective equipment, you have to repair it, and it has to be approved. Chapter 27 requires testing. So you do have an above ground tank, you got to have testing. You just cannot operate that tank without not testing, making sure that it does what it needs to do. It requires limit controls for liquid level, emergency alarms, and it has to be, according to the manufacturer's requirements. Okay. Annually, by the way. If you change the contents, sometimes petroleum products, people do change the contents of the tank. Not a gasoline tank is always going to be a gasoline tank. And they may, especially in oil production facilities, they may have crude oil, and then they may have cutter stock, and then they may have a lighter oil or light ends or things of that nature. So if you're going to change the contents of a tank, it has to be in compliance with the design, the construction, and the general installation for that particular tank. Do I have a fuel tank and can I put corrosive acids in there? No, obviously not. It's not intended for that use, so you have to do it according to that. The fire code official, if they know that you're going to be changing the product, they may require testing of the tank to make sure that it meets the requirement. And if you have a tank that holds flammable liquid, you cannot fill it out with combustible liquid until you have drained and completely flushed that tank. So you can just not mix diesel and gasoline in one particular tank without, flushing and draining all the product that you had. The maintenance has to be in accordance with fire code again. They have to be safe operating conditions, maintained according with the listing of the tank that you have. You have a UL 142, you need to maintain it in a certain way. You have a 2085, then you have to maintain it in a different way. If you have a damage to your tank system, it has to be repaired using materials having equal or greater strength, or replaced or taken out of service. And we'll go through that in a little bit. And obviously you have to do that with manufacturer's documentation. Now, does the fire code require to do it in a certain manner? Yeah, if you're going to do a repair or an alteration of the fuel tank that you need to, it has to be in accordance with NFPA 30, Standard 30, or Chapter 34. General hazmat requirements. I don't like general hazmat requirements because I want to focus on the APSA portion of this training, but these apply to Chapter 27, which is hazardous materials, and not necessarily flammable combustible. For flammable combustible, you have to go Chapter 34. Spill cleanup and reporting. There you go. You got your APSA in there. I bet you that it overlaps at a certain point with this requirement. Personnel training, same thing. Written procedures. Your PE certification, making sure that you are operating that tank facility in a certain way. You have to be familiar with the chemicals and the spill procedures. And you have to have a liaison provided for the fire department. You need to have some pre-planning and emergency response. HMBP comes to mind. You have to have access to the MSDS, and you just have to be familiar with the emergency response procedures. Now, you have one of those sites where you're in Long Beach and corporate's in Ohio. And the emergency contact for that particular site in Long Beach is a phone number from Ohio. And you go to the guy and say, well, we have a spill here. What do we do? He goes like, who are you? Well, that is why it is required that you are familiar with the operation and the materials that you have at the site. Closure. If you're going to close a facility, you just cannot shut it down and abandon, unless you go to Mexico, but I don't know. You have to do it in a certain way. There is a difference between closing a tank or to have a temporary out-of-service tank. You might not have to close that tank. You may have to fill it out, at a certain time of the year, and you may have just to temporarily close it or put it out of service. You need to maintain the permit, obviously, because you will be required to have that tank permitted. You will have to have monitoring and inspections. If you're going to take it out completely, it has to be done in an approved manner. Don't call just a couple of welders and have that tank slice open, because there are plenty of accidents that happen when someone is trying to cut a tank or do something and they don't do it in an approved manner. You need to have a closure plan, and you need to have that in written format and send it to the local CUPA or the jurisdiction that oversees the closure of the tank. Portable tanks less than 660 gallons, or over 660 gallons. You have to isolate the connecting lines, secure them, if you're going to keep them out of service for more than 90 days. And if you are going to have that tank not in use for more than 1 year, you have to remove it. Now, Chapter 34 gives you the exemption if you have a tank at an operating facility. So let's say that you have a 10-acre site where you have a power plant in there, and they have 2 reactors, 2 generators, and they have 1 tank that they no longer use. They will be closed, that tank. It will be closed forever. However, do they have to remove it? No, because it is within that facility, and that facility is still operating. So that's why this exception is given in Chapter 34. The removal requirements, according to this section: typical safeguards, proper resale, disposal as hazardous waste, or on-site processing and then send it as scrap. That means you're going to have a closure plan approved, and you're going to say, yes, I'm going to hire such and such company. They're going to cut it out, slice it out. We're going to take monitoring prior to getting the welders there. Everything will be in an area, contained, disposed, and sent out as a scrap metal. That's fine. APSA. A lot of similarities. I don't know a lot, but there are some. My advice to you is know very well what APSA requires if you are an APSA inspector. And basically, the whole point of this class is, hey, if you are doing an APSA inspection and you see a tank that it's brand new, that it doesn't have proper vehicle impact protection, I mean, those are the things that you don't have to know the entire fire code. That is a document for you to actually look at. But if you do see something that triggers the alarm, well, you know, how come this tank is not protected? How come this tank doesn't have emergency venting? How come this tank doesn't have certain elements that that guy in the Coupa conference told me? Well, you know, that's what I want. That's what you want. So there are similarities. You're not going to compare requirement by requirement. You don't want to do that. And you should check both. Like I said, secondary containment might be calculated in one way in the fire code, in a different way in APSA, and use the most restrictive. Okay. These are some of the resources for fire code, free online. If you go to this website here, NFPA, this is the website, and the State Fire Marshal, laws and regulations, this is the website. So if you do have questions, you don't have to buy this. These are expensive. But if you do have questions, you know, you can actually get online, see what does Chapter 34, you know, said about something that you might have seen during your APSA inspection. And that's about it for me. Guys off to lunch, almost 1:45. And I got a handout and everything. Thank you so much.